Hey guys, and welcome back to another episode of A Dead Giants. We are continuing our little special series, our double act, our duo of episodes focused on the summer movie blockbusters of yesteryear. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed last week's episode. That took us through from the sort of mid-70s through to the mid-90s. So yeah, basically covered 20 years in but a blink of an eye. Looking back, it does feel like it was a blink of an eye as well. I guess that happens as you get older and you get ancient like me. But this week, we're going to continue from 1997 up to sort of the mid 2015, 2018, that kind of era where the summer blockbusters sort of seem to dwindle somewhat. And it's sad, and I do hope we get back to these sort of like incredible original movies that really shaped my childhood and shaped my fandom of cinema. But without further ado, I think we'll get into the 1997 movie. I wonder if any of you were able to guess which 1997 movies are going to be talked about today. I think maybe you probably guessed one of them, but I wonder if you would guess the other. I think it's a slightly forgotten gem in my book. So without further ado, let's talk about some more films. So yeah, the first movie I really wanted to chat about here briefly is Face Off. Yes, Face Off. I could eat a peach for hours. An infinitely quotable John Woo action movie. I think perhaps at his best when he was at Hollywood. He obviously made lots of great Hong Kong action movies like Hard Boiled, which is a Chow Yun-fat vehicle that I absolutely adore, and is actually, I think, heading towards a 4K release this year. I'm very excited about picking that up. But Face Off was when he was absolutely crushing it in Hollywood, starring Nicolas Cage and John Travolta in an absolutely batshit bonkers sci-fi action crime extravaganza. I said that a bit like Nicolas Cage. I think Nicolas Cage has had a career of roles that really kind of take him all over the gamut of performances, often unhinged and crazy, and in a film in which the concept is a criminal and a policeman change faces to look like each other. Yeah, that really gave Nicolas Cage all the potential to sort of play into things as much as he could. Now, so basically, the concept here, Nicolas Cage and John Travolta are playing these two characters. Now, in the beginning, Nicolas Cage is the villain and John Travolta is the hero cop, and then they switch faces and then sort of proceed to have to sort of imitate each other's acting and performance styles while also playing themselves, dealing with the idea of looking like each other and being each other and inhabiting their lives. So there's layers to this movie, and it is crazy, and there obviously has a big sci-fi concept there in the middle of it. You know, that wouldn't work without sort of some crazy future tech. But then we also get like typical John Woo over-the-top diving, dual-wielding, doves flying action movie extravaganza type elements, and an amazing, completely out of nowhere high-speed boat chase finale, which is just awesome. Like, there's loads of practical effects in this, big explosions, great gunfights, like people just setting off automatic weapons and firing pistols at each other continuously. It is a riotously good time, and I just wonder, like, how many people know Face Off? Let me know in the comments. Have you seen Face Off? Have you faced off with Face Off? I mean, I love this film. I've seen it many times, and I think it's a just unbelievably great time. And there's also a really fun sort of supporting cast in here, Joan Allen and Gina Gershon as the kind of the two love interests on either side, one the villain and one the hero, and they have a lot of fun dealing with their somewhat changed other halves who are going through this slightly difficult process of trying to inhabit their nemesis's shoes. It leads to some very uncomfortable, weird scenes, especially with Castor Troy inside of John Travolta, who, you know, is gone home to live with, you know, the nice wife and the daughter, and he's sort of like this unhinged sex fiend, I guess, and completely psychotic. So he has to sort of temper his actions somewhat, and yeah, it's quite weird and leads to some really great moments and double crosses and reveals and action. And it's not a plot I'm going to try and unpick the entirety of, because it's quite labyrinthian and it goes all over the shop, and I think it's one you just have to experience to understand. So go rent, go stream, go buy, go check out Face Off. I have a 4K Blu-ray of it that I had to import from the US because there isn't a release in an official capacity in the UK. That's how much I love Face Off. It's one of those kind of total B-movie, over-the-top action movies that has a really soft spot in my heart, that I remember seeing it for the first time in the 90s, actually, I think, or the early 2000s, and it's absolutely just stayed with me ever since. And I think it might have been the thing that spurred me to actually look into John Woo's Hong Kong output, that the stuff he was producing before he came to the West, and that's how I discovered Chow Yun-fat and things of that nature, from Hard Boiled and The Killer. And yeah, I loved that, getting into Hong Kong action movies off the back of John Woo. And obviously the other big Western output he did was the Mission Impossible 2, which I know one of the giants, Matt, is very, very fond of. So yeah, check out Face Off. You will not be disappointed if you're looking for a fun action diversion. Now, perhaps the bigger, more renowned vehicle that came about in 1997 was the original Men in Black. So this starring Will Smith and the gruff, irascible Tommy Lee Jones, who was on my shortlist for another movie, a summer movie, which I was going to include in this list, which was The Fugitive, but it didn't quite make the cut, just because it's perhaps a little bit by the numbers. It's a great thriller, again starring Harrison Ford, who shows up in a lot of these summer blockbuster movies, it seems. But no, Tommy Lee Jones in this movie as the MIB Agent K, opposite Will Smith's Agent J, is just perfect as a straight man against Will Smith's over-the-top, slightly from the street police officer who's trying to come to terms with the idea of a universe filled with aliens and this over-the-top sci-fi concept. Lots of great special effects, lots of good CGI actually in this movie as well. Really good action, really good chase sequences, very funny in places. Obviously there's a big kind of central conceit of the fish out of water, which is Agent J, and how he comes to terms with this universe filled with aliens and a world that's not what it seems, and it results in, of course, a great soundtrack, fantastic music. Obviously, the MIB song that Will Smith himself did was popping away on the charts for a long time due to the success of this movie. I think beyond 1997, but it was certainly one of those musical tracks that's really synonymous with that time period. And whenever you think of the late 90s, you think of Men in Black and Will Smith. It really cemented Will Smith as a force in the summer movie landscape. Couple that with Independence Day, and he was basically off to the races for a really, really successful and big career. Somewhat in the doldrums nowadays. Some strange things have happened, including a very unfortunate incident at an Oscar ceremony. But I always keep an eye on Will Smith's career. It'd be nice to see him come back to cinema and come back to films. I know there is talk of, or even production of, an I Am Legend sequel, which is bizarre considering the end of that movie. But I've heard that's going to happen, and it would be great to see Will Smith coming back to the forefront in another summer blockbuster type capacity. But yeah, Men in Black is a really great time, really fun, really explosive. Again, I wonder, like, is it watched by younger people today? Is it a film that people know about? How sort of high up does it sit in the pantheon of sci-fi comedy action movies, which is a subgenre within itself, I suppose? But I'm not always a big fan of science fiction movies, or science fiction that sort of pokes fun at itself. But I think it's so charming. Will Smith in this has got so much charm that you can't not fall in love with the setting and the characters and the plot as it goes along. There are some, like I said, great special effects, very, very funny moments. It's a difficult balance to strike, comedy and big genre action like this, and I think they did a fantastic job with this. I'm just going to check who the director was. Yeah, so it was Barry Sonnenfeld? Barry Sonnenfeld. As you might be able to tell from me trying to read that guy's name, it's not a director I'm super familiar with, but he does a great job. And if you remember rightly as well, Edgar, the sort of meat puppet that is filled with the big cockroach monster, is played by the amazing Vincent D'Onofrio, which obviously gone on to do great things, including Kingpin in Daredevil. So yeah, I think it's a really great movie. I wouldn't say it was underrated, but it's sort of not talked about much now. It's not really considered in terms of like sci-fi classics or comedy classics, and I think perhaps that's got a little bit to do with the fall from grace of Will Smith himself. But I'd say it's worth checking out. A very fun time. So that's my little look at the 1997. Now we move into 1998, and a film which I think is the greatest movie of this incredibly famous actor/comedian's career. Now, that might be a slightly debatable proposition, but The Truman Show starring Jim Carrey is a pretty perfect movie. I never get bored of watching this movie. I've watched it many, many, many times, and I think Jim Carrey's performance, where he balances sort of this lovable hometown, sort of small town kind of guy, obviously watched under this microscope inside of this reality TV show concept, which at the time in the late 90s was very on the nose, very prescient with the rise of Big Brother and the rise of the surveillance state. But he plays that character really well, and then as the film unravels, he becomes more and more unhinged, and you get elements of that Jim Carrey that you may have seen from his more wackier output, like the Ace Ventura series or The Mask or Dumb and Dumber, etc., but never quite to that level. He plays it a bit restrained for him. And I think that's when Jim Carrey's at his best. Obviously, in some of Jim Carrey's later movies, he goes very much more into that dramatic acting perspective, things like Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind. But for me, this was Jim Carrey at his biggest. His fame was massive. He was demanding huge paychecks at this moment, one of the most successful comedians ever in Hollywood. And yet he also is an incredible dramatic performer. And that slightly restrained, slightly held back craziness that he's famous for lends the character that he's playing in The Truman Show, Truman, this really interesting edge that makes him both charming, vulnerable, and infinitely watchable. So and the story is so, it's all about Truman. I mean, there is a great supporting cast, Laura Linney, Noah Emmerich, and people of that nature, and obviously Ed Helms as well as kind of the villainous TV producer behind the show. However, it's really Truman's gig, and he's basically in almost every scene, and the whole thing is centered around that character and his performance, and he never fails to bring it. He always gives his best. It's directed by Peter Weir, but I think this is a Jim Carrey vehicle. Like I said, Jim Carrey at his greatest. And if you know him from movies like, the wackier stuff, or the Bruce Almighties, or the Liar Liar, or the Yes Man, which are just straight up comedies, they're all great, but this to me is just perfect Jim Carrey. There isn't a better movie he's made before or since. And I think if you haven't seen it, it's well worth checking out. It's a very emotional movie. It's a very charming film. It's very, very funny in places. It's very ludicrous. And it's just fantastically watchable. So yeah, The Truman Show, 1998. We're getting up to the 2000s, guys. Getting up to the millennium now. We're slowly catching up. Big switch here. Another movie from 98. Another big summer blockbuster. Another Steven Spielberg movie. This man is prolific. He is Mr. Summer Blockbuster, if we're honest. This one, however, is different to very different to the Truman Show, but very different to the previous movies that I've spoken about from Spielberg, i.e. Jaws and Jurassic Park. This is gritty and brutal, and it's the first time we ever got to see such a realistic, honest depiction of the D-Day landing. I'm talking about Saving Private Ryan, one of the best World War II movies made in the modern era of cinema. It is still to this day incredibly heart-wrenching to watch, unflinching in its depictions of the brutality of war, unflinching in its depictions in how humans are able to betray and harm each other. It is a powerful watch, a very sad watch, full of great character actors supporting Tom Hanks in the lead role. Actors that went on to lead their own franchises, lead and star in many other films, but were just there to support in this particular cast. People like Ed Burns, Tom Sizemore, Vin Diesel in one of his very first sort of movie roles here has a small role. Obviously, he goes on to do lots of other things. And Matt Damon as well as the eponymous Ryan that needs to be saved. He shows up in the final act of the movie and has a powerful impact to what goes on. Oh, it's Ted Danson's in there, Bryan Cranston's in there, Paul Giamatti's in there. I mean, it's literally like a who's who of character actor in this movie. And that's got a lot to do with the power of Spielberg on a movie at this point. I think if Steven comes to you and goes, hey, would you audition for or read for a role in a movie? It's only a small role. I think everyone's saying yes. Nobody's going to go, oh, you know what, I'm too big and I'm too important to do that. And many of those guys weren't big or important at that point, but they'd had sort of, say, success in TV or smaller supporting elements. And yeah, to get to be in a Steven Spielberg war epic, you know, a companion piece to his very, very, very dark and important movie in Schindler's List, but Saving Private Ryan is a huge action epic, but it's got that heart that Spielberg brings to cinema that he's able to balance, you know, incredible performances, incredible emotionality at the same time as big action set pieces. And then you add to that the reality of the conflict, the reality of the settings, that most incredible set piece of the D-Day landing. But it's the movie opens with that, but it continues set piece after set piece right through to the third act, final conclusion, and the sacrifice trying to hold the bridge, and those elements as well, and the Nazi war machine and prisoners of war. And it deals with just so many heady elements. And obviously, as a typical white guy getting older in his 40s, I'm a bit more obsessed about World War II than I was back then when this movie came out. So yeah, I find a lot of this stuff more emotionally impactful than perhaps I did when I originally saw this as a late teen or in my early 20s. But yeah, it's a great movie. Who hasn't seen Saving Private Ryan? It's an absolute war movie classic and well deserved to be on my list of best summer blockbuster movies. So let's move on. Again, my God, tonal shifts, flitting and flying we are. We're now into the 2000s, early 2000 movie, this one, 2002. Actually, the same year that, you know, the original 28 Days Later came out, which we talked about a few weeks ago. But 2002 also brought us, guess what, guys? Another Steven Spielberg summer blockbuster movie. Can you guess what it is? No, this is the time he's teaming up with Tom Cruise. He did a few movies with Tom Cruise, including a fantastic modern adaptation of War of the Worlds. But no, we are here to talk about Tom Cruise at his sort of knottiest, twistiest, most thrilleriest, and that's Minority Report. Based on a fantastic Philip K. Dick short story. This is the idea of policemen in the future, able to use sort of precognition, i.e. seeing into the future using a form of telepathy to predict crimes and prevent them and imprison people based on the actions of what they have yet to do, which is, well, let's say questionable in terms of due process. However, Tom Cruise's character, whose name I'm just going to double check, is Chief Paul. Chief Paul Anderson, is it Anderson? I'm just trying to remember what his full name is. I'm looking in my notes. This is very annoying that I haven't got these details in front of me, isn't it? How unprofessional. How unprofessional. Chief Paul Anderton. I guess he doesn't get said a lot in this movie. I've seen this movie many, many times, and I couldn't have told you the character name played by Tom Cruise in this movie. And I guess that's a good and a bad thing, because you see Tom Cruise, you kind of just think it's Tom Cruise doing things as Tom Cruise, which is more the case nowadays with the Mission Impossible movies and the Top Gun movies. But back then, back in the early 2000s, he was taking on much more exciting, interesting, challenging roles. And I do think this is a challenging role. He's a man dealing with loss. He's leading up this division of sort of future crime policeman, and he's, you know, enforcing this precognition law that they're sort of testing in this one particular area of the United States. Obviously things go wrong and he ends up on the run and he kidnaps one of the precogs, and it's all about finding out what happened to people that he cared about in his life and who the big guy in charge has betrayed him, yada yada yada. It's twisty, it's turny, there's some really great set pieces and some amazing science fiction concept in this, obviously wrapped up with Spielberg's eye for detail and polish and performance and set piece and direction. It's a brilliant movie. It looks fantastic. It doesn't let up for a minute, and it establishes a really interesting kind of dystopic world. I personally don't like the idea of people being imprisoned for crimes they have yet to commit. That seems dubious at best, and morally and ethically incredibly compromised. And thankfully, by the end of this movie, they shut the whole thing down, and they bin off the whole project, because yes, for those reasons, it's not a good idea, and definitely leads to a very authoritarian state, doesn't it? But it's a great movie. It's a really, really cool movie. It's right up there with Spielberg's kind of iRobot as well, which was another Will Smith vehicle, though I think this is much better than iRobot. It's a cool movie. It's got some really kind of uncomfortable scenes. It's quite adult. It's quite dark. And like I said, Anderton's performance, Tom Cruise in this, he gives nuance. He gives emotion. He's not just the I'm super hardcore, super capable, good at running guy like he is in Mission Impossible. He feels much more human, much more vulnerable. And especially when they get paired up with the precog played by Samantha Morton, Agatha, and protecting her, and the vulnerability and the emotionality that brings as well. It's a really cool movie, Minority Report. Again, early 2000s epic, sci-fi epic, and it's well worth checking out if you haven't seen it previously. And I would admit, though, I would be remiss. Now, we're jumping ahead a few years between 2002 and 2008 here to talk about a next big pick for me. And there's no way I couldn't have this on the list. Now, it's interesting because I derided somewhat, I've mentioned it in the previous episode, what's happened to summer movie blockbusters, and I kind of attest some of the burnout to that concept to the Marvel machine, because Marvel at one point got up to the fact that they were producing, I think, and releasing 3 movies a year, basically scheduled around the summer season. So one right at the beginning, one in the middle, and one right at the end, which got us to the point of saturation, I think, with superhero movies, and it got us to a point of burnout, and I think it's done some damage to cinema going in general. And now, obviously, with the shift to streaming, especially from Disney and a lot of other production companies as well, a lot of movies are skipping the cinema entirely, and they're not being treated in the same way. The quality of CGI has dropped off a lot, the quality of direction, the quality of the writing, the quality of the performances, they all seem to have been impacted by the rise of streaming, and we're not getting these incredible, impactful summer blockbuster movies of yesteryear, and I think at this point, I don't want to be too harsh on the movies I'm about to talk about going forwards, but they're not of the same kind of quality as we would have had from the summer movie blockbusters in the 90s. Now that we're into the 2000s, we start dealing with stuff that's a bit more obvious, a little less kind of inventive, and we're gonna get, and I have to talk about it, and I will talk about a subsequent one in this series as well, but I have to talk about Marvel's Iron Man, because I was incredibly excited about Marvel's Iron Man. At the time that this came out, I was actually working in a comic book store, I kid you not, and I was super, super, super hyped for the release of Iron Man. It looked incredible. It was finally getting some of the Avengers characters that I loved so much from Marvel onto the big screen after some of the dubious films that we'd seen come from Marvel previously. Not all bad. Look, don't get me wrong. I like some of the Blade movies. I like some of the Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, but they were certainly up and down in quality. The sequels never really as good as the originals in those series. And then we had some really bad movies, like we had Elektra in there, we had Daredevil in there, we had the Fantastic Four movies, not great, not fantastic, and we never really had those Avengers characters. And at the time, I loved the Marvel Avengers characters. I loved Captain America, I loved Iron Man, I loved the Hulk. Those were my guys. That's where my comic book love comes from. So when I heard about the casting, and when I saw the trailers and the hype started to build around Jon Favreau and what he was producing with Iron Man and what he was producing with Robert Downey, this was before anybody knew anything about any further plans, right? You have to remember, all the way back in 2008, we heard there was an Iron Man movie coming. There was no talk of a connected universe. Nobody knew anything about that. The first hint we got of that was at the very end of Iron Man, when Sam Jackson shows up as Nick Fury. And boy, oh boy, was that the most amazing surprise ever. Like, basically leaving the door open. If this is successful, we might do a little bit more. We might see how it goes. Nobody could have predicted it would have ended up in 40 or something movies later, decade plus, huge tentpole releases such as Endgame and Infinity War, which of course can be considered summer movie blockbusters. But this was groundbreaking. I mean, if you actually know about the production, if you've looked into it, it was a chaotic shoot. You know, the script wasn't in place. They ended up improving and writing basically the scenes prior to shooting them. You know, the success of the whole movie depended on that performance from Robert Downey Jr. and the fact that he gave his all after a troubled career where he'd had huge problems with drug abuse and substance abuse, and he was really on the out with Hollywood. He'd lost a lot of respect. He'd lost a lot of love from the community. He didn't really have an audience anymore. And here he is completely reinventing himself, putting himself into this position, taking this gamble in this role for this studio, for this company, for this idea that really was unproven, was experimental, which was kind of guerrilla filmmaking almost on a Hollywood scale. It was completely a gamble, a complete dice roll. And he threw himself in. And you can see that in every scene he's in. He gives 110%. You know, Jon Favreau also knows this is a big opportunity for him, and he's directing this, and I think it shows a bravery and it shows a gutsy attempt at doing something different, in believing that the stories that can be told in the world of superheroes can have emotional resonance, can be exciting, can find an audience. And boy, do they. Iron Man is a massive hit, the sequel's a massive hit, and then we have the MCU off the back of it. You know, the MCU, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, would not exist without Iron Man, obviously. And, you know, that's why we're at the situation where we are today. So they had Endgame, Iron Man died, Tony Stark died, Robert Downey Jr. died at the end of Endgame. He's gone. The output post-Endgame, not great, right? Lost their way. Too many films too soon, not enough creativity, not enough good writing, not enough good performances, not enough good direction. And now we're back to the place where they're bringing back Robert Downey Jr. Now he's coming back as Doctor Doom. We are yet to see how the hell that works. I'm curious. I'm excited. You know, in the same way stunt casting often works in other media, such as the crazy stunt casting we just saw in the last season of Doctor Who, right at the end, to see a character, a Billy Piper, come back from the dead, from long being gone, possibly as the Doctor. It's crazy. It makes no sense, kind of in the same way as Robert Downey Jr. as Doctor Doom. Makes no sense. But guess what? What are you going to do? You're going to go and see it, aren't you? You're going to check it out because you have to know. You have to know how it works. So it is stunt casting. I just hope and I pray that they're going to, you know, connect the dots of quality filmmaking, of quality writing around that stunt casting to make it a film that's actually worth watching. Because if they don't, that'll be it. That'll be it. They'll lose all the audience. They'll lose any goodwill. It'll be the end of the MCU. But that's why 2008's Iron Man has to be on this list as an important summer release that means a lot for the cinematic universe and filmmaking and going to see films in general in the 2000s. It was the birth of a new kind of genre of movie in superheroes. It was also, some might argue, the death of cinema. But hey, you know, you've got to take the good with the bad. Then we move on to 2009. So the following year, we got another kind of reboot, another attempt at to bring back something exciting and interesting and to reinvent something. And that was 2009's J.J. Abrams directed and helmed Star Trek. You know, this kind of came out of nowhere. So Star Trek hadn't been a big hit, hadn't been a big success on TV for a while. It had dwindled away after Enterprise. There wasn't much being produced. It had all gone very, very quiet. And then out of nowhere, J.J. Abrams with Chris Pine, Zach Quinto, Leonard Nimoy, I've got to have that nostalgia connection, and others, came back and brought Star Trek back to the big screen in a big, splashy summer blockbuster way. You could argue, looking back, that the Abrams Star Trek films don't have the same heart or character or emotional resonance that, you know, some of the product in the Star Trek universe, such as the original series or TNG, The Next Generation had, or even DS9 or Voyager. They kind of miss a little bit about what makes Star Trek, and actually it's just a big explosion-y, action-y, sci-fi slop. But it's very entertaining, and it's great to see this reinvention of the Star Trek universe, and they do enough with the lore to justify the recasting of Kirk, the recasting of Spock, etc. And they obviously get Leonard Nimoy in there to hand over the baton, as it were, to pass the torch on from his Spock to a different Spock who has a fundamentally different relationship with Kirk and has a fundamentally more contentious relationship, for example, which is very different to what we knew from the TOS. But I think they do it just well enough where you can kind of forgive the rebootiness of this. At this point in 2009, we hadn't seen all the reboots that are to come, and that become kind of the big output of Hollywood for some time to come. Lots of reboots and sequels and interquels and anything else you can think of to basically not have to be creative and come up with your own idea. And I think that's one of the things you will see from a lot of the films that I've talked about in this list over the last 2 episodes, is that many of them are original ideas, or at least original adaptations into the big screen. And then we start to get into the 2000s and the later 2010s, where the risk of that kind of project starts to outweigh the benefit. So studios start playing it very safe, especially with streaming and COVID, and that's only made it worse. And they're only going to do, rehashes and another adaptation and another reboot and another sequel and another leverage of an existing IP, because, otherwise it's too risky. They can't fund a film unless they've got that kind of safety net. It's a real shame, and I hope we can get back to something better, and that will depend a lot on people going to see films in the cinema. If the box office rebuilds to a point where smaller movies are getting that, viewership again, then more risks will be taken. And so far, indications are looking pretty good for this year. There have been some unexpected smaller hits, so fingers crossed. It's not all doom and gloom yet. So the next one I want to talk about is 2012. So this was Marvel's The Avengers. Now, basically, I've put 2 Avengers movies on here, if you like. Iron Man because it was the beginning, and then The Avengers because it was the proof in the pudding that the dream of this crossover universe of characters actually could work. It's obviously got some extremely unfortunate and questionable elements attached to it now, in the elephant in the room shaped hole that is Joss Whedon. Yes, he wrote and directed The Avengers. He was heavily involved with bringing this together into the big screen. Stuff has come out subsequently that makes it a little bit harder to love the things Joss Whedon's done, including Buffy and Angel. However, you cannot deny the power and the impact of having those characters on screen together, especially if you were like me and a comic book fan and a Marvel fan to boot. So, having Chris Evans, Robert Downey Jr., Mark Ruffalo, Chris Hemsworth, Scarlett Johansson, all sort of circling up in that final battle for New York to fight the Chitauri, and to find out, that they're all being driven by this big bad Thanos, and that there is a plan, and that everything's going to be connected, and we're going to get more, and this is just the beginning. The Avengers has got so many huge fan moments. That first introduction of Thor, Iron Man and Cap, where they do that inevitable thing that heroes always do, which is fight each other. It was so perfect. I remember watching this in the cinema and absolutely losing my shit. I just loved this movie, and it was so exciting to see this happening, and it being done well, and it being done in a way that wasn't, unnecessarily gritty, or, no money, so it looks like shit. This was given the love, the attention, the money, the budget, the performances, and the direction it deserved at the time. So I love this movie. This movie will always be super important to me. Even I kind of trying to decide if Iron Man or this has a more important part of the kind of MCU to me, because obviously there'd be nothing without Iron Man, but the Avengers proved that the concept of an interconnected universe was actually going to work and was actually going to pay off and end up with the fantastic Russo brothers storming success that was Infinity War and Endgame. And that wouldn't have happened if Avengers hadn't been a success. Avengers, again, was one of those turning points where if it does well, we've proven we can go for this plan. And if it fails, this will be the end of it, right? So this was before Marvel was this sort of bulletproof organization that could take any loss, which is what we got after Endgame. And it's taken quite a few years for them to change course and actually start producing the content and the films that we're excited to see again. This year's Thunderbolts was fantastic, and I'm really excited about Fantastic Four finally being part of the MCU. But Avengers, would they have existed without Avengers? I don't think they would have, right? So I actually think Avengers has a more important part in that timeline. So yeah, it's a great movie. It's a really great movie. Really, really fun time. So guys, this is interesting. 2014. It's the last year, the last film on my list that I want to talk about, and I'm glad we're going out on an original concept that's not part of a franchise, that's not a huge part of an existing IP. It is an adaptation. However, it's an adaptation from a different part of the world. So, this was brought to the West and adapted from some manga. So most people were not in any way aware of this. And this is Edge of Tomorrow, also known as Live, Die, Repeat, starring Tom Cruise. And like I said, this is the last one on my list. So Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt, and directed by Doug Liman. It's kind of, in a way, it's also kind of like the last gutsy, off-the-wall production Tom Cruise has done. He's played it quite safe with Mission Impossible and obviously Top Gun. Since then, though, there are rumours now that the last Mission Impossible movie is the last time him playing Ethan Hunt for quite a while, and he's going to go off now and take on more interesting projects again and get back to some of that. But he did this a little bit after he did Oblivion, which was another sci-fi project of his, which was very good as well. Not as good as this. This is a fantastic concept. Basically, Groundhog Day in a sci-fi kind of post-apocalyptic world in which he has to fight this huge alien invasion. He's this propaganda officer that gets thrown onto the front line, and he starts off the movie in a way that isn't that common for Tom Cruise, especially in the modern era. He's very unlikable. Now, he was very unlikable in War of the Worlds as well, by Steven Spielberg, but again, similar era. Recently, he only has been playing kind of the straight up hero kind of characters, but in this, he's this, quite greasy propaganda officer who's doing everything possible to avoid conflict. He wants to sell the conflict to the wider people, the wider masses, but he doesn't really want to get his hands dirty. He's a bit lazy. He's a coward. He's definitely afraid of action, afraid of facing the mimics, the enemies in this. But then, because it's a Groundhog Day concept, his character gets this amazing development arc, juxtaposed with the fact that the characters he's interacting with don't know that, right? He's the only one going through this. So much like Bill Murray in Groundhog Day, he gets to grow and change and develop, where everybody else is sort of shocked at his changes and they don't understand what's happening. So you get these moments of levity and humor, which are inherent to that concept, but then played out against this sci-fi epic with great action and fantastic performances, including from Emily Blunt, in a fairly early role for her before she kind of massively broke out as a big star in her own right. But she's got an amazing performance in this. She's never, I think, brought a kind of a better kind of gritty energy, and yet they have this sort of interesting relationship where obviously he's developing as a character, she isn't. So he ends up getting to that point where he has to sort of like try to shortcut explaining things to her, and it turns out she'd experienced something similar previously. So there's this wonderful connection between the two of them. And again, this is this one-off sort of movie. I think it's quite well known, quite well regarded, but I would say definitely check it out if you haven't already. It's a really fun time. I love that Groundhog concept. It's sci-fi and it's fantasy all at the same time. Who wouldn't want to get to relive things to make sure you do the right thing or do the perfect thing and sort of play around with that? Though, much like in Groundhog Day, he does have that moment of complete desperation and collapse because he seems trapped in this loop for all time. And, he repeats it hundreds of times, and it would be obviously psychologically quite challenging to deal with that. But yeah, there we go. That's the end of my list. And like I said, I've ended in 2014. Mid-2010s. 10 years ago. Even a little bit more than 10 years ago now. And I think that's quite indicative of what is being produced as, summer movie fare now. Thank you to the Avengers. Thank you to them for proving that Marvel could do it. But I also think that those types of output from Marvel, and then DC tried to mimic as well, but to not as much success, has dominated this summer time slot for movie releases to the point where it's sucked the air out of the room so successfully and eaten up so many billions of dollars of box office success that there's not been room in that world for the lesser summer movies. And I say lesser, I don't mean like 20 million, I mean 100 million instead of 500 million budgets, right? So I think it's a really interesting world we've been in. I think the shake to Marvel that's happened now in the last sort of 3 or 4 years post Endgame does mean that there is going to be more opportunity for these films. And we're seeing it already this year, for example, a little bit ahead of the summer movie season, but we saw Sinners, the new movie from Brian Coogler, which we did talk about on the podcast a few weeks back. was a big success in the box office as well. And I think it's got a lot to do with there being more space and more appetite for different offerings that are not part of just this ginormous connected gestalt, which has been Marvel for some time now, especially considering the output has been lesser and lesser in quality. So it's really exciting. I think we're at a turning point in cinema. We're going to see a big change in what's being produced. I don't think streaming is the death of cinema. I think if you look at the output that's coming into the cinema this summer, that actually there's still loads of room for theatrical releases. It doesn't have to go straight to streaming. And I think, yeah, it can still come to streaming a month, 6 weeks, couple of months later. That's fine. But we do need to give time for films to have that theatrical release so people can go and have that experience of seeing them in the cinema. I also know, saying that I am of a certain age. I've grown up going to the cinema and loving trips to the cinema, always being excited to go and see a new film. And that's not the same for a lot of young people today. Even people only say 10 years younger than me are much less enamored by the cinema experience. They find it can be frustrating, or it can be unpleasant, or the quality isn't as good as it should be, or it's disruptive due to the people in the cinema with them. And most importantly, when the convenience of streaming and the convenience of just being able to watch whatever you want on your big TV at home, why bother? Especially with the costs, especially with the crunches on credit, as it were, and the cost of living crisis and things of that nature. When that's happening, why would you pay what could equate to as much as £20 per person to go and see a film in the cinema, depending on where you are in the country and what's available to you nearby? It isn't as accessible as it used to be. It's not like you could pay a few quid to go and see a early afternoon matinee performance of a movie, or go and, like I used to do, hang out with my mates in the cinema for a whole day, watch 3 movies back to back. That is not going to be financially viable for a lot of young people now. And I think that's such a shame. And I think the two ways cinema need to go is boutique cinemas such as Everyman and the Alamo Drafthouse in America, really capturing those event moments where you go and it's an adult experience, and you go and have a meal and you do that, and it's a really fancy cinema. And then you've got the sort of big experiential cinema experiences, so IMAXs and the 4DXs, that are almost like going to a theme park. And then you need, on the other end of it, you need to make the cheaper end available as well. So a less fancy screen, but it's still digital and it's still good. It might not be as big, but let's see those prices come down, because otherwise cinemas chains like Cineworld and View and stuff of that nature, they're going to disappear. Because I went to see 28 Years Later, opening weekend. I went to see it about midday, so one of those matinee style screenings, and there was a total of about 8 people in that cinema, including me and my wife. So, and that was in a big screen. That was a big screen. And until the trailer started, we were the only people in there. So it's like, I don't know who we're going to... I'm praying people keep going to the cinema. I really am, because I love it. And I love that experience of in the summer, the big blockbusters coming out and you getting excited and getting hyped and watching the trailers and buying the tickets and looking forward to it and making a day out or an evening out of it. It's great. It's so much fun. You don't get any of that from streaming. You just don't, from watching it at home. And I watch loads of stuff at home, but I still love going to the cinema. So please support your local multiplex. Go see films in the cinema. It is important if you love this medium like I do. And I hope over these last 2 episodes, you've been inspired to go back and watch some of the blockbusters from yesteryear. Please leave me some comments and give me some feedback. What have I missed? I know I've missed some brilliant ones that you love. Tell me about it. Let's talk about the ones I've missed. So yeah, send me some messages. I look forward to engaging with you guys. Thank you so much. Please give me a like and subscribe on everywhere. We're available on Spotify. We're available on iTunes. We're available on Audible. You name it, we're on it in terms of where you can get this podcast from. Give us a like and a review. There's been some more coming in. There's been some reviews coming in, and I really do appreciate that. So please do some more of those. It really helps get us out there to a wider audience. Yes, like and follow as well on the social channels such as Twitter and X. Twitter is X, but you know what I mean. And Blue Sky and Instagram and all of that stuff. We post whenever a new episode goes up on there as well. It's been great talking about the summer movies that were formative and interesting to me over the years, and I'm really hoping a few more are going to join that list this year. Expect me to talk about them in future episodes. So until then, have a lovely one. I look forward to talking to you all when I'm back from my holiday. Until then.